Well, you will soon have to pay GST when you shop online, even if you're buying from overseas companies. The Revenue Minister Stuart Nash made the announcement this morning, saying the current system is unfair to local retailers because big businesses like your Amazons essentially sell goods to us tax-free. Well, the move could bring in around $6 billion in tax revenue over the next 10 years. But forcing GST on overseas online purchases is a notoriously complex thing to do. We wanted to ask the Minister, Stuart Nash, some questions, but he refused our request for an interview. His press secretary said he'd front for a media conference this afternoon, but he never showed. And then his office promised a statement, but they never gave that to us either. The acting Prime Minister, Kelvin Davis, was also unavailable for interviews today, so I asked the National Party spokesperson for Revenue, Judith Collins, for her assessment of Minister Nash's announcement.
Well, he hasn't been able to follow it up with any details, so it tells me that Stuart's gone off on his own as usual. It's certainly an issue that we've looked at in the past, and we were progressing. But we also had the issue about whether or not we continued with a bordered tariff, which is currently charged on a lot of goods, and whether or not that was fair to add that, keep that in if we were putting on GST. So it's a little bit more complicated than probably Stuart Nash has worked out.
And do you get the sense that he's walking that back a bit? He didn't front media opportunities after this morning, and I see Grant Robertson.
Well, I'd say that Stuart Nash has probably been told to back away a wee bit, because there is actually a cost. Either you add the GST on and you keep the current border tariffs in place, or the administration costs or the inspection costs that customs currently charge, in which case we're asking New Zealanders to pay above what they should be paying, or else you take those costs off, and then you've got to fund customs for the work that they're doing when they're inspecting goods. And that's something which I would imagine Stuart Nash hasn't thought of. One of the problems with not having cabinet committees operating, as the current government haven't, is that nobody's giving them that advice.
Well, let's see and look at that, because I have looked back at a cabinet paper that Nikki Wagner, when she was Minister of Customs, got, and it had a couple of examples in here, and I can't work out exactly how they arrive at this, but the officials seem to be saying that it wouldn't just be the extra 15% GST that you'd be paying. You might even be incurring some other tariffs as well. The officials give two examples. Shoes from the UK at $150, they say, could increase to $209, which would be nearly a 40% increase. Clothing from the US at $100, is the example they give, could increase to $145, which would of course be a 45% increase. Can you tell me why this would be an increase over and above the 15% that you would expect if you started to add GST?
Well, it would be, unless you're going to fund customs separately or differently than what is currently done. So customs at the moment they get to take and to keep as their funding, part of their funding, the inspection costs that they actually have to undertake. So even though if you buy something in from, say, the UK, you think, well, okay, I'll have to pay GST on that in this new regime, but you probably don't realise that that product also has to be inspected by customs to make sure it is actually what you say it is. And so that's something, when we got the advice on that, we thought actually we don't really want people to have to pay even more, but we do need to look at the funding around how we could do that with customs. So there was ongoing work, and that's one of the problems that Stuart Nash has got now, is he's gone straight in for the jugular, and he's forgotten there's another department, another ministry out there that actually needs to be taken care of.
What about the equity issue here? Because the retailers will say this a lot. They'll say, you know, we're collecting revenue effectively for the government. We have to compete against these online providers from offshore, and it's simply not fair that they don't pay their GST, and also means that the New Zealand public loses out on the thick end of a couple of $100 million, it might even be more, of revenue that we'd quite like to spend on schools and hospitals and what have you. So what do you say to the justice argument here?
Well, I think that they're absolutely correct, and I feel a great deal of sympathy for those retailers, land-based ones in New Zealand, who are employing people. And that's why I think it is important that the issue is addressed. But you can't just address it in isolation as a GST issue. You've also got to address it as a government in terms of the funding for customs. So Grant Robertson's probably told Stuart Nash to keep quiet and to back down, because suddenly he's seeing the fiscal hole is opening up again because they haven't counted on this cost that they obviously haven't even thought about.
So that's Judith Collins, the National Party Revenue spokesperson. As we did say, we asked Stuart Nash for an interview, but it was a no-go today.